it's not enough to do nothing. It's time for us to do something.
Well, good morning and welcome to Pellowe Talk. I'm your host, Dave Pellowe, and today we're doing a very special interview with a guest from Live Action in America, because this month we are celebrating Sanctity of Life Sunday. So we want to talk about life, and this is a great time to introduce Joanna Hyatt from Live Action in America. Welcome to Pellowe Talk, and thank you for joining me, Joanna.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be in Australia without having to get on a plane ride.
I know. I actually brought a friend over, a American commentator over recently, and it was a very long and arduous plane ride for him, longer than usual, unfortunately, due to a lot of cancellations and things that were happening before the real lockdown started. So we were quite blessed to be able to get that happening. But tell me about Live Action. How did it start, and what does it now do as an organization in the pro-life space in America?
So Live Action was started by our founder and CEO, Lila Rose, when she was actually 15 years old. And she created this organization to originally educate on abortion. And she went around to her local churches and parishes trying to give presentations where she could to teenagers to educate on what was happening at the Planned Parenthood just down the street from where they lived. And then when she was a freshman in college at UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles, she did her first Undercover investigation. And that one was what really kind of put her and put the organization on the map. It blew up nationally. That Undercover investigation was going in to the local Planned Parenthood to see what was happening, what were they telling pregnant college women coming from the university. And then over the next 10 or so years, we've done a series of investigations and really become an organization that is known for educating on abortion, for exposing the horror of abortion, and for also really fighting for the humanity of the child, and I would say to the humanity of every woman who is carrying that child, because there's really two involved in every situation: the primary victim, which is the child, and the secondary victim, which is the mom. And so now we are an organization based in the United States that has the largest online following of any group in the movement here in the US. And so on all social media platforms, you can find us, and we really work to educate people on what's happening with investigative pieces, of course, undercover journalism, but also just breaking down things that can be maybe a little complicated. When Planned Parenthood says that abortion is only 3% of their services, what does that mean? Is that true or not based on their annual report? And also equipping people who are pro-life to be able to themselves respond in conversations that they have in their communities, because really we're going to win this fight at the local level when every person not only is convicted as to what abortion actually is, but actually is also equipped to be able to educate and activate their community.
Absolutely. One of the campaigns that I use frequently, referring to Live Action's great work, is this one with Anthony Levatino, just explaining exactly what happens in those procedures in the first, second, and third trimester, and I really love the videos you produce alongside them of you showing people on the street who identify as pro-abortion, and then they watch these videos, and all of a sudden their views change, and what that really reveals to me, or demonstrates, is something that I already knew, and why I do this, and that is the level of ignorance.
Yes.
There's just not enough information out there. That the information Planned Parenthood and their affiliate here in Australia called Marie Stopes, these people and all of their apologists are extremely invested in selective information and actually keeping us quite unaware of just how extreme abortion is, as well as its impacts on women. Tell me, how large is Live Action now? Starting an organization at 15, I'm aware that it's now probably the leading pro-life movement and organization in America. But how do you get from an organization that's comprises of a 15-year-old girl to a really global influencer in the pro-life discussion space?
I would say it's by doing excellent work consistently. And we've been blessed to have some really wonderful people that have come to join us, people who are passionate about the issue, but also driven to do the best work of their lives. I mean, if you look at our job descriptions, that's a line in there. And we take that very seriously, that we hire people who are saying, this is the fight of our generation, and we are going to do everything we can to do it to our best ability so that our children will hopefully have a different fight, a different outcome, that abortion will no longer be necessary. And so we have a combination of people that you see on a more public scale. You have Lila, you have myself, you have some of our media people, and then we have a lot of people that are kind of behind the scenes that you don't see, who are really the ones doing such phenomenal work on our research and on our videos and connecting with our partners and supporters. And so it's a real collective effort. But I think
how big is the organization now?
See, that I can't tell you yet, because then that would be trade secrets. But we're larger than one and smaller than you would probably expect, because our effectiveness really comes from hiring people that we know are going to do excellent work. So every person we bring on is just phenomenal in what they add to the team, and it's been very cool to see how our team grows. I mean, we are in the process of growing again, just because of the incredible impact and I would say favor that we have been given. Ultimately, it's God who gets the credit, because God is the one who is opening doors. God is the one who is opening hearts and minds to be receptive to the truth. Those videos you showed, the abortion procedure ones, those have been viewed over 100 million times. And for those of us who have maybe grown up pro-life or have been in the pro-life movement for a while, we forget how little, like you said, people know about the truth of abortion. And so we kind of forget the basics of people are defending a position that they don't actually know a whole lot about. And so to come at them with grace and understanding, to say, we invite you into a conversation because we don't think you actually know what you're supporting, has been really transformational in the impact we've seen. And so it's been neat to see how God takes what we offer and has multiplied that.
That's so good. And that actually makes sense, that I've seen lots of Christian, not just pro-life, but pro-family organizations that are punching well above their weight. You're just really surprised how blessed their efforts are. And you think, wow, that you managed to do so much with probably half the people that I thought you might have had, if not less. So that's really exciting to hear. What's your role?
My role, I am officially Director of Strategic Partnerships, which allows me really to just do a lot in the relational field. So I came on originally at Live Action 4 years ago, well, actually 6 years ago, as an undercover investigator when I was pregnant with my first daughter, and was a part of the Inhuman campaign, which looked at late-term abortions and infants born alive. And then 4 years ago, came on full-time to help with investigations, to work with outside partnerships with other organizations, and to do a lot of fundraising and major gift cultivation. Getting to connect with people like this is exactly in my wheelhouse, where I get to share about what we're doing, but also encourage and be encouraged by the work of other groups in other countries, because the fight to end abortion is not country specific, it's worldwide. And I think the more we remember that we're all in the battle together, that there's, last week I was on a call with people in England, and today I'm on a call with you there in Australia. And it's so thrilling to me to see how hearts are being stirred around the world to fight for the defenseless.
Yeah. Now, I'm convinced that that we should make abortion illegal. But I'm not actually fighting for legislative change. I mean, when a battle comes up and the question comes to our parliament, absolutely, we need to be there. We need to be representing. We need to be the loudest, clearest, strongest, wisest voice advocating for life and for justice and human rights. But I think any legislative change will be short-lived, if for the positive, unless we change the culture which nurtures future politicians. And the example I use is Wilberforce. He abolished slavery but not by himself with a legislative change. It was a generation of grassroots Christian activists who helped influence and change culture. They lobbied together, and Wilberforce might have been the name that was public in Parliament, but it was the Clapham sect and a whole lot of other Christians. And it took a whole generation. It wasn't an election term. It wasn't an election cycle, which is something that I think we lose sight of today, and we get frustrated if we see something not bearing results in the very short term. Then we think there's a level of futility, and so do nothing. To what extent do you think it's possible for us to change the culture to make a pro-abortion political candidate as rare as a pro-slavery political candidate?
I absolutely think it's possible. When you look at where the movement is now, we should not be as strong as we are. When you consider, at least in the United States, in terms of when Roe v. Wade came down, people thought that was the end of the discussion. People thought that they would win that fight easily. They had the money, they had the politics, they had the media on their side. And yet 40 plus years, we have a pro-life movement that is as robust, if not more robust than ever before. And we are winning on the grassroots front. We are winning in the political front. And for the US, at least, what you're seeing is those candidates who say abortion through all 9 months, government funded, no limits, no exceptions, nothing. They are outside the mainstream. They are the extreme, those who advocate for that kind of a stance on abortion. And we're seeing more and more people realizing that life is sacred. I am convinced that this period of coronavirus and all of us being locked at home and all of us being willing to make sacrifices because we value human life is in some ways going to bolster the work that we do on the front end of life in order to be able to help people make those connections that, hey, guess what? You were willing to stay home. You were willing to suffer economic distress even to try to protect your neighbor. In the same way, we need to be advocating because their life is sacred. So is the life of that child who is yet to be born. So is the life of that mother carrying that child. She needs community. She needs hope. And so I'm encouraged when I look at where the movement is today. I'm a mom of 4 girls, and I hope that they will have a different fight. I hope by the time that they really come into their own, that whether or not abortion is legal, abortion is no longer necessary. And that is what Live Action and Lila Rose, we fight for, is to say we want to get to a place where abortion is not necessary because every woman knows that she has community and support, and every child is seen as the embodiment of love, regardless of their circumstances, that they are loved and they have value. And when I look at the people who've come before us in the movement, I'm so grateful for their faithfulness, for having not given up in those times when it felt like maybe they should just pack it all in and that the abortion lobby was going to win, that they have continued to fight and to toil and to put in the work because you and I stand on their shoulders. And even though we may be doing things differently, and even though we've learned from that, we would not be here today had people not given up or had people chosen to give up. And so I'm so glad they did not. And my challenge to me is, and to everybody watching really, is we can't give up because the next generation, if we don't finish this fight, they're going to build on what we are creating. And I hope that what we give them puts them that much closer to the finish line.
I'm interested and want to pick up on a phrase you used, and that's making abortion unnecessary or considered unnecessary. Of course, it's not. But how exactly do you guys, how does Live Action work with women focus? This is probably an ongoing and evolving, maturing discussion amongst pro-life groups, is that we're clearly and never were just concerned about the baby, but quite often our rhetoric in decades past has been just about the baby and just about the heinous and obvious injustice of killing an innocent living human. But how exactly do you guys focus on representing compassion for women and the fact that abortion is harming 2 people and the injustice to the woman that's being perpetrated by the industry? How do you articulate and persuade people to care about women on your side of this argument?
We at Live Action have done that in a few ways. We had a campaign that we launched a few years ago called Love Them Both. And you see that phrase in a lot of places. You can, we have shirts with it, we have bumper stickers, but we don't just print it. We talk about loving both, that we're here to love both the woman and the child. And that impacts the way that we look at how we talk about this issue, remembering that for every child, there is a woman represented in that situation. Because if you're going to save the child, you really have to reach the woman and save her. And so we are intentional in the stories we put out. We, as much as possible, try to highlight women who themselves have gone through an abortion or their parent almost chose an abortion, and it changed the way that they have lived, because we want to show that there are real women walking this out in a personal way. And then even just last week or 2 weeks ago, I hosted for Live Action a webinar live cast where we highlighted pregnancy resource centers across the country and the work that they are doing. Yeah, because we all have different roles to play in this. Every group covers different areas in the movement. I liken it to if we all had tents back in biblical days where they all had tents, and if we all spread our tents out as far as that we should, we will cover more ground, knowing that the work that Live Action is doing to educate, to inform, to activate is different than the work being done by pregnancy resource centers to meet those women's needs today so that they can choose life tomorrow. And so as much as possible, we try to promote them. We try to encourage them. The whole aim of that live cast was to direct people to their local pregnancy resource centers to say, how can I get involved? What can I do in this time of quarantine? Because the need doesn't stop. The fight doesn't stop. And as we've seen, the pro-abortion movement is very active in the midst of a quarantine. And so we who stand for life need to be equally active and engaged.
Yeah, that's certainly something that the Sanctity of Life Sunday is trying to achieve in Australia. And that is to, what you just said, to highlight the pregnancy resource centres that are out there in the community, because they don't just need awareness, they also need support, real and measurable support. I don't know if they receive any government funding in the States, but here in Australia, they get nothing. They're entirely run off donations because they're not pro-abortion. And if you offer more than one choice, apparently you don't get government funding. So that's something that in culture that I'd like to change. Like if we're going to change legislation, some of the easy things we can ask politicians on the left to do is to demonstrate more compassion and choice and women's empowerment by helping women who make a different choice than the abortion industry profits from. What about if they want to keep their baby? What about if they, in my state, in Queensland, you get zero support, zero funding, zero interest at all from any government agency until after you've had your baby. At that point, your baby has to go into foster care before a discussion about adoption can even start.
Wow.
It's actually really, really hindering any other choice, not just absent. That, like, I know people who were raised in the foster system who would rather abort their baby than have their child end up in the same kind of torture that they experienced as a child. And so as a society, we're like, this is really, really not in the least bit empowering or helpful or supportive for women and compassion.
Well, and if you think about how much money is spent, for instance, in the United States, Planned Parenthood gets about $500 million a year from the federal government. And if you took that money and you directed it towards helping women so that the pregnancy, because really it's their circumstances that make their pregnancy seem like a crisis. It's not usually the pregnancy itself. It's the fact that they are homeless, or they have been kicked out, or they are in an abusive situation, or they're going to lose a school scholarship, or things like that. If you took those $500 million or however much money is being put up by the government there, and instead said, we're going to do everything we can with these dollars to make the circumstances different for you, what would those women choose? It would actually mean we're supporting women. It would actually mean we're coming alongside of you and saying, the pregnancy is not the crisis. Your current situation is, but that can change. And we want to walk that road with you. But abortion just tries to end the pregnancy so that she can continue to live in whatever situation she's in. It doesn't change her homelessness. It doesn't change the abusive relationship. And to your point, it's a disservice to women, and it leaves women in situations that don't empower. And so abortion is never going to leave a woman with more options. It just leaves her in the exact same place she was, with new heart wounds.
Let's drill down on that just for a second, just for a minute or two. What kind of ways could a government specifically change a pregnant woman's circumstances?
Well, when I was pregnant with our second daughter, we happened to actually be on welfare and food stamps because of our circumstances. And I was amazed at the amount of resources available, at least here in the United States, for me who was pregnant. But those are options that are not usually talked about. And so I think it's coming together as communities to say, what does our community need to support the women? Because every community is a bit different, right? Here in the United States, every state is a little bit different. The West Coast versus the East Coast, they have different values and characteristics and cultural things that need to be looked at. And so I think it's saying, how do we as a community, if we come at it saying, how do we encourage women to choose life versus how do we encourage them to choose death, ultimately, it will change the way we go about it. And then we'll be able to say, well, what is it that our women need? Is it that they need childcare? Is it that they need, to be taught some skills that they can do? Is it that they need flexibility at work so that they can be a single working mom? Is it that they need scholarships at university? What is it that's missing in this equation? And so I don't think there's any one size fits all solution, but I think it's coming at it to say just even the perspective difference will change the results.
Yeah. Talk to the Christians, perhaps the ministers who may be watching now, or maybe the Christians who have ministers that need encouraging in a way that's not lecturing or pointing the finger or in any way condescending or critical, but in an encouraging, collaborative way. How do people start if they've got no idea and a great deal of apprehension about the harm they may cause if they tackle this topic unwisely and not in a right way? How can they do good without doing harm in a congregation, given there's probably people in the congregation who have made past abortion choices and are still dealing with trauma from that?
Anytime we talk about issues that are close to heart wounds, we need to come at it with humility, and we need to come at it with grace and humility, that we won't know everything there is to know about an issue, because everybody's story is a little bit different. Right. So what somebody has walked through in your congregation may not be what you will ever walk through. And their story is as valuable as your story. But also the grace to know the grace of Christ covers everything. And I've grown up in the church. I am actually a pastor's kid, and I'm a former missionary kid. So I have all kinds of dysfunctions. But one thing I have seen that a lot of times is missing in conversations around sexuality, and I would say abortion is tied in with this, is that somehow there's a limit to what God's grace can cover. And so I think we need to lead with that. And grace doesn't mean that there's no sin that needs to be forgiven. But grace says that no matter what you have done, you are not too far from the love of Jesus. He pursues every single one of us. And so if we have that humility to know, I myself have done things that God still says, I love you and I died for you, even though you did that. So it goes for abortion. So it goes for anything else. And so if we speak from a place of grace and humility, it will change the way we talk about an issue versus trying to come at it from a place of condemnation or trying to shame someone into owning that they've been wrong. Now, that doesn't mean we don't talk about the truth, but when we start to say, look, we're going to cover some heavy topics, and I might not talk about this always accurately, and be open to feedback in your church to say, if I talk about this in a way that is wounding, please let me know, and let's have a conversation so that we can both move forward for healing. Because not talking about something does not spare people. All it does is it keeps them in their brokenness. It keeps them in the dark. And I think the enemy would love nothing more than for us to not talk about those things that are controversial, to not talk about those things that are tied deeply to people's wounds. Because if he can keep us hidden and hiding with our hurts, then, and we don't bring it into the light, there's no opportunity for healing. There's no opportunity for restoration. And so I would encourage those who've not talked about this, that as daunting as it may seem, know, first of all, It's not a political issue. It's a gospel issue. This is near and dear to the heart of Christ.
Amen. So true.
Because children are losing their lives every day, but also there are men and women, not just women, but men and women sitting in your congregation bearing the shame, bearing the scars, bearing the brokenness, who need to be talked to and say, hey, we still love you and we actually want to help you experience freedom. And so it is out of love and a desire to see your people thrive that you should be figuring out how to tackle this. And if you don't know, that's okay. That's why organizations like Live Action exist, to be able to help equip you to know how to talk about this in a way that is both gospel-centered, but also loving and compassionate, in a way that what we say is whimsical and beautiful while still rooted in truth.
Interesting. That's an interesting phrase, whimsical and beautiful while still rooted in truth. What do you mean by whimsical?
I think whimsical, you can engage people in conversations in a way that it doesn't always have to be so heavy-handed. That's why we tell a lot of stories. We tell a lot of personal accounts, because it adds sometimes a lightness, but also just it humanizes it, and it makes it less about we're beating on you or we're trying to make you feel bad. And it's a person looking you in the eyes, sharing their own story and where they've come from and where they've journeyed. And the more that we share story, the more that we find that we can connect with people and understand an issue, even if we don't always experience it ourselves. And I think for those of us who fight on the side of life, it's remembering that there are human beings involved in this. Yes, human beings in the womb, but also men and women, families who are affected by this. And so as we talk, it's with a desire to set them free, to bring hope and life into where they're living, and to breathe that beauty into their life of what their future could be, regardless of what their past has been.
Yeah, nice. What do you think is the key to two things? You can touch on these at the same time. Might be the second may be part of your answer to the first. First question, how do we change culture? Second question, how do we work together? There's feminists for life, there's pagans for life, there's atheists for life, there's all these other people. It's not an exclusively Christian worldview, but even amongst Christianity, there's a lot of diversity, let's say, and different approaches to how we approach life. And in the Unplanned movie, we saw that some of them can actually be sometimes counterproductive and unhelpful. And I would agree with that. I think, I haven't seen them that extreme here in Australia, but I know they exist. And some people are just quite uncompassionate about the way they approach this issue. So first question, how do we change culture? Second, how do we work together without losing focus of what we're called to do?
So first question of how do we change culture? If you look at history, which you referenced, William Wilberforce, great social movements have come from showing the victim. And I just want to give an example. For instance, during the civil rights movement here in the United States, there was an instance of a young boy, Emmett Till, who was 14 years old, and he had gone down south. He was from the North. He was African-American, had gone down south and ended up, I don't know, maybe commenting or whistling at a woman. They don't quite specify, but he got beat up and eventually killed at 14 years old. And when it came time to bury him, his mom said, I want you to leave the casket open because I want them to see what they have done to my boy. And the images of him sparked really a kind of the beginning and really added fire to the civil rights movement. And then when you saw Martin Luther King marching with all of those people who were so peaceful, and people began to see the victims, it changed the outcome, because suddenly you started to see who it is that you were oppressing. You started to see the faces of men and women and children who were being so horrifically treated on the basis of their skin color. And so taking that to what we're talking about now, showing the victim. So I would say there's two victims. That's why we have the abortion procedure videos, because we are showing the victim of what is happening to a child in the womb when they're being dismembered, when they're being poisoned, when they're being starved. People need to be reminded that that is what is happening, that children are dying by dismemberment. Children are dying because they're not receiving the food in the womb. But then also there is a secondary victim of the woman and the men. And that's why we tell those stories at Live Action. And that's why we really want to give those voices an opportunity to be heard, because they too are the victims. And when people begin to take it out of this like very vague abortion, women's rights terms, it sounds like almost clinical, and begin to connect that this is a human being we're talking about. These are people's lives we're talking about, then suddenly it resonates. That's why you see such a dramatic change when people see those videos, because it connects for them. Abortion is not like a root canal. Abortion is the taking of a human life. And so showing the victim has power. And we intentionally have done animated graphics and not actual body parts, because we want to invite people in a conversation who would normally say, I don't want anything to do with that. And so it allows for that opportunity for engagement before they shut down. And so social movements happen. I mean, William Wilberforce, they showed the victim. They showed how many people were crammed into slave ships. And when they started to show people what was happening, they started to get that momentum and shift it. Because no matter how much you want to cover up with terms and headlines, the reality visually eventually breaks through. So that's how I would say we win a cultural movement. And that's why we continue to share those stories at Live Action. And we will continue to expose what's happening in abortion facilities. And then how do we work with other groups? How do we work with groups when we don't agree with them? I think you can't get everybody, first of all. And what I appreciate is the diversity, because we have different ways that we're coming at it, right? Because we're reaching different people. But for most of the groups, the objective is the same, right? The objective is we want to see an end to abortion. How we go about that might be different, but the heart is there. Now, what I try to remember when I encounter people who are standing outside yelling on the megaphones or coming at it in a much harsher approach than I would generally champion, is I remember that they're coming at it because they're angry, and they're rightfully angry. There is an injustice happening, but that anger is coming out instead of that anger having led to brokenness, which leads to humility in how we reach people. And so I try to stay mindful of that, compassionate towards them. For me personally, I think it's important to pray for people, to pray for those who are still in the abortion industry. It will keep you from vilifying them, and it will remind you that they are human beings just like you, that they have families, that they are trying to, feed, that they are trying to make a difference in the world, and they just haven't yet had the opportunity to see what is the truth of what they're doing. So I pray for them. And then I pray for those who in the movement we disagree with, and in the movement we clash with, because ultimately it's a heart issue. And God knows their heart. God knows my heart. And God knows that I always have work that needs to be done. And the groups that you work together. We are stronger when we're united than when we're against each other. And trying to be territorial never wins, because there's plenty to go around. God is not a God of limits. God is a God of abundance. And God does not say, well, I had $100 and that group took 95, so you only get 5. God knows what we need. And God knows that we are stronger when we work together, when we mobilize together, when we remember that we are in the majority and not the minority. And yes, there will be differences about what kind of legislation we push or what's the best approach. And yes, some groups are Christian, some are not. There's sectarian differences. There's any number of things that could divide us. But the thing that unites us is this fight for life. And what I love to see is the fact that it's not limited just to Christians. That this is something that resonates at the core of people, that there is an injustice happening and we need to do everything we can to right that injustice.
Yeah. Awesome. Well said. Thank you so much for all the work that you do. Thank you for the passion that you and all the rest of your colleagues bring to this justice issue. And I think you said it really well. It's not a political issue. It's a gospel issue. That this is about making God's will manifest here on earth as it is in heaven. And that is that there be justice and peace and freedom, equality and dignity for everyone. regardless of their location, age, race, gender, etc.
Yes.
Circumstances. It goes on and on and on, and I'm a constant reciter of the verses in the Bible which command us to seek justice and to intervene where there is none, and to advocate for the widow and the orphan and those people that
Yes.
God consistently and Jesus saw as downtrodden, oppressed by the elites and the established power. He was always advocating for those people. So I think that's the heart of the gospel.
Yeah.
It's not just about spiritual renewal one day far away, but it's actually about a change in our world for the better here and now. And if anything's going to change, I think it has to be the church that's involved in it. But that's not to exclude my viewers who are not Christians, because most of them, or many of them, would acknowledge that our society is a Christian culture with a Christian foundation, and that's common across the West. And that if we're part of that, then even our legal traditions ultimately stem from that understanding way back in 1215, the year 1215, when it was finally documented that even the king, the highest authority in the land, had to acknowledge he would one day give account to a yet higher authority, the sovereign God Almighty, King of Kings. And so that's actually where we get our values for liberty and freedom and justice, that if you're not a practicing religious church-going person, well, you're still part of a culture that has those values. And that's why we have such a great culture, is because this is the gospel, and it is the foundation that we build a society on. So I agree with you. We can change culture. We've done it before, and it just takes a long time. But it is not done by people who give up and think it's impossible. So, yeah, God bless you very much, and all the work that you all do. And strength to your arm.
Thank you, Dave. Absolute pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Well, that was Joanna Hyatt from Live Action, and it's such a privilege to be able to talk with such an organization, really leading the world, I think, setting a standard in the media that they produce, the strategies that they execute, and being very effective. I'd recommend you go to their website, liveaction.org, where there's lots and lots of resources, as well as their social media channels, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Everything's just another resource that's going to be very helpful for you as you get ready to celebrate at the end of this month. That's Sanctity of Life Sunday. So just want to talk about that briefly. The day is 24th of May. And that's the Sunday nearest the anniversary of the first legalization of abortion here in Australia. That was now 51 years ago. And on this day, we're not demanding a legislative change. We're not attacking any politicians. It's not a partisan or denominational day. Today, on the 24th of May, that is, on Sanctity of Life Sunday, we're going to just bear witness to the nation that life is a sacred gift from God, that God said humanity uniquely is made in his image and therefore worthy of dignity and respect and equality and all of these human rights that our constitutions and courts, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, etc., all of these people recognize. They don't create or grant rights, but they recognize our God-given rights. And we're just going to bear witness to the nation. It's the most gentle, beautiful way to help change culture. It's a great place to start. And on this day, there's no condemnation or guilt or shame. It's just saying every life is beautiful. God said so. Every life is worth defending at every stage. And this is the role of the church. We don't wait for a politician to change culture. This is the church's role, to be salt and light in a way that actually influences and actually changes the flavor of the society that we're in. And if we're not doing that, then we're useless and only worth throwing out to be trodden underfoot, according to Jesus. So let's have a part in changing culture. The details are there on the screen. Head to the website, sanctityoflifesunday.com.au, and you'll find resources and an invitation to help celebrate. This is something that we do. It's not an individual. It's a grassroots human rights movement that's led by the church, saying life is sacred. So let's change culture, and hopefully one day in this generation we will bring an end to any kind of policy or philosophy that doesn't value life as equal at every stage. So that's this episode of Pellowe Talk. You can subscribe to email updates at davepellowe.com. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Dave Pellowe. And as always, thank you to the Pellowe Talk Partners who freely and generously contribute to keep this show and this platform and this ministry operational and free to everyone. And we will see you in the comments section.
Time for us to do something.